Well, we are here for the first ever remote podcast, drop-in podcast that I've actually ever done. We're joined by Aaron Abrams. Have I got your name right by saying that?
Yep, absolutely.
You are the director of product at Marin Bikes.
I am, and it's not my first remote podcast, so we'll get through this
Okay,
together.
you can show me the ropes. But yeah, we had a chat like about a sort of unrelated issue a couple of weeks ago, and we kind of got chatting about the whole thing that's going on in the bike industry, and I immediately thought I need to get him back on and chat about this stuff because I'm sure people will be really interested to see and hear things from your perspective. You've got your sort of feet on the ground. You're in Taiwan. You're in the factories to give people an idea of what's going on. If you were, say, to bump into someone in a pub and you were to tell them what you do, and they immediately say, "What's going on in the bike industry? Where's my bikes?" What's your sort of go-to snippet?
Well, when they ask me what I do, I generally say, oh, I make bikes, and then some people just say, cool. And other people say, well, what does that mean? And then I have to get deeper into it. But yeah, basically my side is working on the planning for product line, the development of bikes, which means like working with a lot of different um, sides of things. So engineering, design, if some of the more complex stuff into working with some of the suspension providers, like myself and my team, we do quite a lot of those backside details, and then arranging for the production. So working with a lot of the suppliers internationally to get things to our assembly factory where all of the parts get put together. The frames that we design, some of the parts we design, and the other parts that we spec, and then trying to get those out internationally to all the different markets who are, riding Marin bikes, and where we have either, Marin bikes distributors or some of our own offices in those markets. So that's kind of the 30,000 foot view. And if somebody then says, well, where's my effing bike? Depends on what you ordered, when you ordered it, and when you're really expecting it to be there. So yeah, I guess the obvious part is COVID. It's the fun and not so fun answer for everything, but the impacts on the world in bike world for us for this conversation. But you read a lot of different things from semiconductor chips all the way through just like backups at ports and all kinds of wacky stuff. So like this is basically like the year of finding out what could actually go wrong, because in the past it was always like, oh, this one thing happened and wow, that sucked, and then we overcame it. Or this other thing happened and oh, that was kind of expected, but it took longer to solve than we thought. But yeah, man, this year is like kind of the insult to injury on top of other nasty things. So
when you look back to the sort of start of COVID, when did you guys, from a sort of industry's perspective, sort of get your first sight of changing things, whether that was sort of slowing down in delivery times, factories closing down in Asia and stuff like that? Was that all the way back in 2019?
The 4th of April last year. And then at that time, all the bike companies are just like, oh man, this is going to just kill everything. So some of the really big guys, especially in Europe, some of them started to cancel orders and put delays on orders. So basically, companies have orders that are anywhere from 2 months to 4 or 5 months out, which means like you place your order, you're expecting those parts to come in, in that what they call a lead time, which is 2 months away, up to 5, or on a really important product, it's like 6 months away. And that's something very technical, something that's very high demand. And So, some of those companies start delaying it. And then as countries are going into lockdown, as kind of the self quarantine, or, every country called it something different. But as the lockdown started to happen internationally, in the US and like UK and a few places where the lockdowns were more of, I don't want to say suggestions, but like they weren't like, if you come out in the street, a cop is going to come up to you and fine you or push you back home. It was kind of like a stay away from people, and all the group areas are closed and all the national parks and stuff are closed. But anywhere where you were still allowed to recreate and go outside and do stuff, even if like in the UK it was an hour or something, but like in the States it wasn't limited to time. It was just like no social gatherings, no groups. All of those places, immediately bikes just shot. Like, just the sales of bikes just went through the roof. Watching the metrics on what people were looking at on the internet, like, really focusing on bikes. Health clubs were closing. All the, like, we all know the story. I'm sure everybody watching is a bike rider. So that stuff just started to go nuts. And at that time, like I said, a bunch of orders had been canceled and a lot of stuff had been, kind of put on hold. On another tangential story, in China, they had a major shutdown. So China always shuts down for at least 2 weeks during Chinese New Year, and for most industries, what that means is like a month of production delay. So you get people like anywhere like a week before holiday, your mind's wandering and production's, the productivity is going down. And then you have a couple weeks that are actually off. And then China is a huge country, and traditionally, like, the transportation's slow there. So, like, of course you can fly, but a lot of people are taking trains. A lot of like local ground trains that take a long time. So it takes like a week or more to get back to work, after Chinese New Year's over. So the actual impact is now generally about a month. But they went into massive lockdown. So then they had a month of additional lockdown on top of that kind of compacted month that they had for normal world. So they're just off the back. So like right as they're coming back around, which was like the beginning of April and middle of April and some into May, these companies are starting to like cut orders. So like they're coming back, they got all these orders, everybody's pushing like a normal spring, like springs when people start to ride bikes. So everybody's like, oh, like, we don't have any stuff producing, and these factories are closed, and what are we going to do? And you guys got to get back to work. You got to get back to capacity as fast as possible. And then all of a sudden it's just like, well, hold on, we don't need these parts anymore. And, I know you guys are coming back to work and your workers are back and things are happening, but like, stop. And then the West, a lot of USA, North America, some other countries internationally just hit the gas super hard. So you have this massive whiplash effect from a place like China, where a ton of bike components are produced. And they're off, they're way underwater with what they should be producing. And then stuff gets canceled. So they're like, oh, we're okay. And then all of a sudden the demand just hits and just skyrockets. So then, so that was early May, when like that was just like all swirling and crazy stuff happening. And all of that, to just get that pushed under the rug, took until like October, like just to kind of get past all of that nonsense. And then meanwhile, from May on, demand just went like crazy. And then you've got all of these companies placing huge orders, and more and more and more. And all of the people that supply all of the parts, like everything from the bikes that you see, like the lowest cost stuff that you see at department stores, all the way up to the most premium bikes that in the world. And everything is just getting more popular, and everything is getting bigger demand. And all of like every company in the bike industry is placing more and more orders as they see that demand come. and all, like, there's a limited number of suppliers and they're taking the orders. And then we see that demand, or that lead time, that time from order placement to fulfillment, just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So then by basically around, let's say, August of last year, people start talking about it's going to be a year until you see the part that you're placing an order for, which is completely unheard of. Like planning a year away on something like a bike is it's just crazy for all of us in the industry. So so
especially when you need so many different bike parts as well to make up a bike. It's not like you just make the one thing.
No, and that's a big deal. When you talk about what a bike's made out of, if you take a step back and you think about a bike, it's, a lot of people are like, oh, it's metal, but or it's carbon, and okay, so that's the frame, and then you have all of the parts on the bike. So even if you take simple stuff like grips are made out of some kind of a mix of types of plastic. Injections, you take a saddle's made out of some kind of a fabric cover that's using some kind of a polymer embedded into it, a foam on the inside, an injection base, and metal rails. You start to look at each component of a bike and you think about all the different things it's made of. Every one of those things that it's made of, and every part of some of that comes from somewhere. And you're talking about, like, if you break a bike down into every single part that it's made out of, you got hundreds of different things sitting around from different makers, different types of materials. You've got every one of those makers have some stream. So you start to break out like this one bike into this spider web of parts, and then every one of those parts into this spider web of suppliers that are making it. And, like, before I got into the bike industry, I just had this vision of like, oh, you hit bike and it goes bonk, and there's a bike, and then all of a sudden it's at your bike shop. And then once you really get into the supply chain of stuff, and you meet the suppliers that make stuff, and that's really cool. And then you understand that they've also got a back end of their suppliers that are providing either raw materials or semi-finished goods or finished goods to them. And then all of those, and like that tree or spider web or however you want to look at it, is ridiculously big. And, COVID, and every one of those has a story of, some critical people got sick, or some boat was stopped somewhere. There's a boat kitty corner in the Suez for a few weeks here. There's a ghost ship out in the Atlantic for some period of time with 5 people who are just kind of stuck on it, and they don't know where to go, and no ports will let them in, or empty containers that are too many in one place and not enough in another. And it really is like the comedy of errors of massive scale and every level of proportion.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting when you think of that. Like I had gone as far as kind of thinking as the bike and its constituent parts, but then you make a good point that like each one of those parts has constituent parts as well as that, and it's like, and it suddenly goes exponential, and you've suddenly got like 700 companies probably like going into one bike.
You do, and like I said, like somebody like 3 or 4 levels down the food chain has something that goes wrong. Like for instance, over here, everything was hitting the fan and delete times were going crazy. And then this company that does the polishing on magnesium lowers on suspension forks. So like the lower of a suspension fork is made with a die casting, which is basically taking liquid magnesium or aluminum, and you inject it into a mold at high pressure. And the mold's like a clamshell, like 2 pieces that come together. And then the mold releases and you get out this like raw casting. And that has flashing on it. Like if you think about like a model car, and like you get a model kit, and you've got like the plastic tree, and you have to like take the piece off, and you got to sand the edges so it doesn't have that parting line in it anymore. Like that's how a lower from a suspension fork looks when you get it out of a mold. I mean, it's hot as hell, but it's, theoretically it's the same thing. So they break off the big parts and then they send it to somebody because magnesium is extremely volatile. And especially when it's in a powder form, it can explode, it can catch on fire. So there's a one specific supplier here that like everybody that like if you name a suspension fork brand that comes to the top of your head, that supplier is one of a few that does that sanding. They caught on fire. So they had, about a month of delays, and that impact cost 3 months to a few of the bigger brands out there. And it's just like, okay, well, what a great year to just randomly have a fire. So like you got everybody pushing you all this stuff, and then yeah, you got a fire. You got the fire department there. It takes you a while, like just to, it's like caustic smoke. It's all this terrible stuff. So a lot of stories like that.
I can imagine. It's like just once something goes wrong, everything goes wrong. I heard I watched a really good piece on Vital MTB with Joe Graney, and he had some pretty crazy stats on some of the sort of lead times that he'd been quoted. I think it was like 500 days for a saddle or something. That was a few months ago. Has there been what's sort of your sort of main sort of mad lead times that you've been quoted by different suppliers, whether it's for a saddle or another component on a bike that you guys have tried to source?
Yeah, so thankfully lead times have basically stabilized at super freaking long. So like I said, when we got to the point where somebody said it's a year for something, like the first stuff to really get that far was like the high end, or actually it's not even high end, it's just like drivetrain parts. So like the stuff, if you think about the stuff that you can't replace, like there's a few companies that are on everything from the base level all the way up to the top level. And so drivetrain stuff was an early one, because like the derailleurs and the shifters and things like that, like they're legitimately complicated parts that take a long time. And the companies that make those, they have, years, some of them have 100 years of history of making stuff and supplying the market and growing with the market and always being there ready to grow with the market. But the demand that's being experienced is it's just impossible to grow with. Entry level suspension forks, mid level suspension forks, same thing. Like, at this point, a lot of those drivetrain parts, they're not really giving exact lead times over about 13 months on some of those. So it is in reality, it's 18 months, maybe a little bit longer on some things. Some entry level suspension forks and some of that stuff is 18 months at this time. So what I've seen and what's happened lately is they have gotten to a point where we're not seeing stuff really get too far past that. That's kind of like as far as it goes. So at the beginning, a lot of people were thinking a lot of the suppliers are giving us these crazy lead times because they're just kind of saying, like, if we tell them that, they'll just say, oh, and kind of stop. But then everybody just started to adjust to it. And then they're like, all right, well, shit. And we tried to say 12 months, they still placing orders. Let's go to 14. So like 18 is about as much as anybody will quote you. Some stuff could go past that, but I think everything's, and it sounds terrible, but it's kind of normalized of like these lead times are like super long, but they've kind of stopped getting longer and they just stay super long. So like we move a month and it keeps going that one more month that way.
Yeah. And do you find like from the start, whether it was say 3 months lead time on a certain thing at the start, or you're getting quoted a 6 month lead time a little bit further down the line, looking back at those instances retrospectively, are those lead times that you get quoted, are those reasonably accurate when it actually comes to fruition? And do you find you are getting a part in 6 months when you've been quoted 6 months?
Yeah.
Because that sounds
as a whole
incredibly complicated to try and estimate such things.
Yeah, I joke about it, but I also know the people, so I have a lot of sympathy. But to me, being the production planner at an assembly factory would be like the worst job in the industry right now. So, and to answer your question, yes, things are relatively realistic when quoted. However, a bike is again made up of so many different things from so many different places. One factory falls down on something, and you can't bolt a bike together. Like, you can't ship a bike without spokes. You can't ship a bike. Like, one of the funniest things, like for me, was I had my factory ask me like, "Hey, do you know where we can find some tubes?" And it's like, in my whole freaking life, tubes have never been anything. Like, I grew up in a bike shop. I've been in bikes literally my whole life, and I never had trouble finding a tube. And then they're like, for somebody to ask me like, "Hey, like we got bikes that we're really worried about getting tubes for, or we can't put them together." And like, oh man. And then, like I was reading some forums, and some people were saying like, well, if like a seat is the longest lead time, just ship it without a seat. And like, okay, well, what happens when it gets to the bike shop and all the people that that make aftermarket seats, they couldn't get a seat from the supplier either. So now you got a bike at a shop with just a seat post sticking out. Like, what are you going to do then? You're going to go out for a really nice ride with your dropper post with the raw head on it. Like,
and I suppose there must be some sort of some regulations as well, maybe there, where maybe, I don't know if there's regulations.
Yeah, it's probably illegal to
countries.
Yeah, we need reflectors and saddles. Yeah, those are really important.
Oh yeah, that must be super frustrating if you can't ship a bike because of you've not been able to put the bell and reflectors on it, even though you know that they're going to get ripped off as soon as they get taken out of the box.
Yeah, and it's like there's always something. This is the time of like it's always something. So I think a lot of us, I got a lot of buddies in the industry, and here in Taiwan on this side, and over in the States or Europe on various different parts of companies. And for me, it was hectic. It was real bad for months. Like basically 2020 was real bad. And then now here we are, and it's just like, yeah, it's real bad. And you just gotta get past it. Like, yeah, this is what we got to deal with, and things aren't changing. And, luckily like bikes are popular right now. And, like I said, I've been in the industry my whole life, and, I've never seen anything that is anything like this. Like the number of people that are getting on bikes that haven't gotten on bikes before, and the interest in our sport and our industry and all this stuff. Like, I look at it all the time, and like super lucky to be involved in something like this with so much bad stuff going on. And, there's so much bright stuff also going on, and, I'd sit with friends, and, we're having drinks or something, and people are talking about, like, oh, my job sucks and this sucks and everything, that's going on in the trouble side. And then almost always it comes back to like, it's so cool that more people are riding bikes now. Like it's fantastic for the whole situation of bikes is better right now than I think it probably has been. Even if you can't get the bike you really want, and like that stuff. And I totally sympathize with that. I think that is also awful. But the more people that ride bikes, the more trails there are going to be, the more accessibility there's going to be, the more advocates there's going to be. Like all that stuff is so important for the future of everything that we do. And man, there's so much more of it coming from this in the near term than any other thing that's ever happened for bikes ever. So I'm super positive about that.
I think a lot of people are sort of speaking about it potentially being like a bit of a boom. There's inevitably going to be like a little bit of regression, but I think from my perspective, I think I'm pretty optimistic just knowing how much fun bikes are. I can only imagine that most of the people that take up bikes or have dusted their bikes down after a few years, I can only imagine them really enjoying it and carrying on into the next sort of few years rather than just putting it back away again.
Well, I'll tell you what, the only people who need to worry about the regression side are the ones like me, I guess, that are making bikes and are dependent on people continuing to ride and to buy. But if you're a rider and you're into the sport, like everything that's happening right now is really positive for you. You know, like you got more friends to ride with, you got more people that are going to try to open trails, you got more people that are going to fight to keep your trails open. You got more people who are going to become politicians at some day who are really positive about bikes, and they had a great experience in 2020, 2021, or however the hell long this thing takes to sort out. Like that stuff's going to last for a generation or two. That's really positive. And then on the market side, there could easily be a point where there's too many bikes in the world after you have a flow, you have an ebb, and yeah, maybe you'll get something a little cheaper than you would have before. So
yeah, it's an interesting one when you sort of think of, like you say, it's such a positive time to be in riding and cycling, but at the same time, how do you sort of balance that with being cautious in terms of your sort of forecasting, in terms of just actually how many bikes you make? Because it must be such a hard balance to strike between going all out and just building a ton of bikes if you can, but then also try to balance that of not wanting to be stuck with a load maybe next year or the year after.
Yeah, I mean that's like the whatever $64 billion question or however you want to phrase it. Like, here in Taiwan with the people that I talk to, factory owners and people who are working to source stuff and supply stuff and everything. That's it's like I feel like I'm in Groundhog Day. Most of the discussions I have, like it's the same thing. Like, have you heard anything yet? Like, is anything changing? Like, do you know something we don't know? And at this time, so, starting last year, like I said, around May, it was just like, oh man, people want bikes. And so, on Marin's side, we were really lucky because we've been growing for a while. Like, company's been doing well, and we're all really, stoked and proud of it and working hard to keep that direction going. And then this started to come, and that whiplash that I told you, like where a lot of people are canceling stuff. And I remember specifically some meetings where, the management team, and we were all talking about like, what do we do? And basically the idea was like, well, we've been growing. If things shrink, like we'll probably do what we did last year. And if things go bigger, like, okay, good. And at that time, like, we had such a good track record in the last 3 years. I was like, all right, well, we can just adjust for it later. Like if we have a little bit too much, we'll deal with it at the end. And then, so we just kept things rolling. Like it was a bit of a roll of the dice, but based on what we were working with, it was okay. And then like, as soon as we knew, it was just like, place more orders, go, 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 go. And everybody around us, like these guys are just jumping in with these huge orders. And basically every single day, the lead time was getting longer. So like our group is placing orders to the suppliers. And one day let's say it's getting pretty long now. We had to add a month on. And then like we place something 2-3 days later for another part. And they're just like, oh, just so you know, everything is like 3 months longer now. And then like the next week it's 4 months, and the next week it's 5. And then all of a sudden it's like within a very short period of time, it just went. So, yeah, like that part, everybody's waiting for the hammer to fall. Everybody's waiting. And like right now, so like we're talking on April 1st, which, hopefully it's not some kind of weird shit going on, but, my feeling was, spring rolls around 2021, and that'll tell us a lot. So if people are still buying bikes and the market is still hot, and there's still a demand, and there's less supply than the demand and all of that through spring, which is traditionally like everybody's building as much as they can through the winter to have bikes for the spring and the early summer, because that's when people ride and buy. My thought was like, demand continues through this time, this year is going to just be big. It's just going to keep going that way. And that's so far April 1st. March is kind of like some places are getting warm, things are looking good, sun's poking around, ice is melting. So basically, this whole month, like, this is really the proving ground this year. And if nothing goes sideways, nothing changes, then yeah, I mean, my advice to somebody who wants something that they tell is out of stock or whatever, like, put your order in, and get it when you can get it. Because if you can't get it right now, they can't give you a time for it. Like, everybody else is doing the same thing. So if you really want it, order it, get it, try to get it moving, get your stake in the sand, and then hopefully you'll be able to get the thing that you want by this time next year if everything works out. Which sucks. I mean, it's not what people are used to when you have Amazon and it's there in a day and a half and shows up with a drone or whatever. But this is unfortunately the reality.
I guess when people do get it, it'll be all the more sweeter. In terms of, like if you were to be speaking to someone who is thinking about buying a bike, whether it's from you guys or from any of the other bike manufacturers, other than just be patient and wait a year, is there any, I don't want to say the word tips, in terms of like what they can do to kind of keep up to speed or basically navigate the process of buying a bike, whether it's a cheap bike all the way up to an expensive one at this time?
I mean, for one, keep riding. Like, enjoy yourself. Like, nothing is going to make you more prepared for the new bike than more time on your old bike. But if you know what you want and you're ready for it, then yeah, get in line. Like, go to the dealer, get your name down, get settled for it. Because as far as I can see, I don't like to say it, but as far as I can see, like, that's how you're going to get a bike. There's a lot of pre-orders in the field. People have gone in, people have put money down or have committed to something. And if you don't do it, you're just going to keep getting further in the queue. I mean, it's the same with any of us on this side. If we delay on placing an order to one of our suppliers, it's only going to add more time to the time that we get the parts and we can make those bikes. So, unfortunately, that's just how the chain works. And, I'd recommend, maybe make sure your deposit is refundable or transferable, just in case, like, all of a sudden, you thought you were Mr. Enduro, but you get really hot on gravel. maybe you should make sure that you can transfer it over to a different bike. But in any case, like, yeah, just get in line. Things are coming. We are building bikes. I will say, it sounds like fluff or whatever, but there is an entire industry that is working at its absolute maximum potential right now. And every single supplier that I talk to, I mean, you're talking about like having sales girls downstairs bolting stuff together and, like putting a grip on a package or, putting things in boxes and doing stuff. Like, you've never seen this level of output before. And the demand is bigger than that. And that's why things are out. So people are hiring, people are doing things, like they're activating their workforce in ways that, probably most people would have never accepted the job if they knew were going to happen. But that's all going on right now. And like factory owners are on the floor working on production stuff and cleaning things and sweeping and I mean, you've never seen this level of output out of this industry. And I've been on this side of the industry for about 12 years, and the other side for quite a lot longer. But things are happening as quickly as they absolutely can right now. But thankfully, so many more people are riding bikes now, and this is just unfortunately the penalty for some. But like I said, I think the positive side is going to outweigh that in the long term. So just yeah, just enjoy it. Check out the ride, see how it goes.
And one thing I was going to ask you that I didn't even really think about it till we're speaking there. Just hearing the sort of everything and the difficulties that's going into just keeping on top of current orders. How do you even begin to work on developing new bikes in the midst of all this madness?
Well, so 2022 model year was generally what we were working on last year. You know, some of it started in 2020, 2019, but working on 2022 model year. So we just had to basically cut and run on some plans. You know, things were happening so fast, and we had a list of plans. Like we got roadmaps and plans of things that we want to do into the future, and we had to modify those based on what was going on. And then 2023 is somewhat similar, but I'll tell you one thing that's happened is because components haven't been able to change. So some of the major component makers have just said we're not going to change anything for a little while because they can't. Like, if you want to put a new component into production, you have to change the tool on the machine. You have to change your packaging. You got to get things ready. You got to do all this. They honestly can't take a single day off to do that. So normally it's like, okay, we're going to make all of this stuff up to this time, and then we're going to stop, and then we're going to go kind of dark for whatever, a week, 2 weeks, a month. We're going to change the tools in the machine. Anything that you're making, you got to do trial runs, pilot runs, and you got to check it and make sure it's good and make sure what you're making is going to succeed. And then you gear up and you go into production, and they don't have time for that downtime. Like anything that they would do like that is just going to blow it out for everything that's existing now. So so a lot of components are continuing the way they are for a while, and some things are changing, a lot of things aren't. It's just kind of back and forth. So we've got a little bit more time to do some development stuff that we haven't really had time to before because we're so set on having to change some of this or that, or holding back because of some compatibility that may or may not change. Nothing crazy. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, there's no new axles coming or anything. But like, there's just things that we wait until we hear like what's new on a timeline, and and how that's going to affect our product and our market, and how we transition from our model years or our product years to other product years. And right now we're pretty confident that a lot of people aren't going to be changing a whole lot of stuff drastically. They'll do some new valving or tuning or this or that that's more like internal stuff, and polish this or dust that. But so we're able to get into some other stuff. Like we can really focus on some frame stuff, some chassis revamps, some tuning of things on our own side, and we've been able to keep that going. And I feel like based on what I hear, there's still a lot of development going on. There's a lot of new stuff coming, and a lot of people that are still keeping the gas on. And I think there's a lot of companies that have a little more cash this year than maybe they had in the past. So they can't supply enough, but not a lot of people have a lot of inventory sitting around. So inventory is very expensive to sit. You've got a lot of money in those products that you purchased. You got money on getting them here. You got money on sitting in a warehouse. Anything that's sitting in your warehouse is money that's just, basically lit on fire and is sitting in a corner. So yeah, there's not a lot of that right now. And it's, in some ways, like I've heard some people say like, oh, it's a real shame. Some of the trade shows aren't happening and some of this and that, and there's not as much, maybe that's going to stop some innovation happening. At the same time, there's a lot more cash in the industry in people's pockets, some people's pockets than at some other times. And if people are really focused on the industry and their brand and that stuff, they're going to be spending it on figuring some things out. And then again, going back to like, there's more people riding bikes, and there's more people who have very interesting ideas about all kinds of stuff, and they just found bikes recently. So I think the next few years could bring out some really cool, interesting things from different perspectives who, maybe would have never been into bikes, but this year they got really fired up on riding or some aspect of bikes or something. And that part's pretty exciting.
Nah, it's been awesome to see, and I'm glad to hear from your side of things and hear that you've got an optimistic outlook as well. So another thing we briefly talked about over email was, again, it's not necessarily your sort of area, but this whole Suez Canal thing is quite topical at the moment, with the Ever Given getting stuck in the middle of it for 7 days and creating a big
I've seen
backlog.
some memes. Yeah, I've seen a couple things on Instagram about
memes
it.
have been off the charts. Do you have any insights on, even though it has been unblocked now, in terms of short term effects on the industry and lead times and stuff? Because I can only imagine that's such a well sort of oiled machine that once it gets knocked off the track, it must be a nightmare.
Yeah, and honestly, like obviously, like every joke has already been made, but the fact that something so seemingly simple could be so complex, like to me, it's just like, all right, that's 2021. Like here we are. This is just like and like in a normal year, it'd be like, oh, this sucks. This is dumb. And now it's just like, man, like these things, like everything that's on, boats behind it or in front of it, like that's stuff that people order. That's stuff that people are looking for. So, most of what's going on there, like that's a lot of stuff that's going from Asia to Europe and UK. So like, thankfully for us, we had a lot of stuff in front of that boat, a few things behind it. I was reading some stuff today, there'd be knock-on effects for a couple of months because of that. I saw some boats got rerouted around, around a continent. So it's just, again, it's just adding more stuff on, like the one of the big things that kind of happens as of about September last year was the shortage of shipping containers. So that's nothing secret. Like that's been well publicized. But basically, because so many people have been ordering online and so few things were coming back to Asia, ports have been very slow. Like for us in almost every area, we have a backup of boats, like boats sitting out in the harbor waiting to just come in and get unloaded. In the past, that would be like, a few hours, maybe a day. Now we have stuff that could be waiting for a week or 2 weeks, which is basically like a container boat sitting in the ocean doing absolutely nothing but waiting to come in and get unloaded. The fees of the boats being, waiting in transit, the stuff going on of the delays inside of the ports, the delays outside, the delays inside, just for like one container for the UK, you're talking like 350 pounds per day of just the container sitting around. And if you think about like, okay, it's going to be 2 weeks or whatever, like, man, that stuff adds up really fast. So, a lot of the price increases that have been seen this year, just in the bike industry, but you'll see it everywhere. The price of things is just, you can't avoid it going up because shipping costs a lot more. There's less capacity to ship stuff. Also, consumer airlines going down. They're saying that that more than 40% of consumer goods were shipped by passenger airplanes. So you put a bunch of people on top and you put a bunch of goods below, and then like all of a sudden you just stop all those flights. So then you got like a 40% reduction. Some of those companies, some of the major airlines just said, all right, well, we're just stacking the whole plane with boxes then, keep it going a little bit. But in general, the impact there was huge. And then what happens is like bikes are usually shipped on boats because they're big and they're heavy. And people just plan, they plan that it's going to be 3 to 5 weeks of water time until it gets there. But once you take like all this stuff that was sitting on airplanes that was like, oh, toothpaste, let's just get it there. And then you're like, oh, well, that's too expensive. So let's just put it on a boat. And all of a sudden boats are full. And then it's like, oh, hell. And then we can't get enough boxes, enough containers to put all this stuff on just to sit it on a boat. And then there's not enough boats because some of them are sitting in a freaking harbor on the other side of the world. And it's just like, huh. So that stuff, like raw material prices are up, aluminum prices are up, and steel prices, like all that stuff. Like, like you talk about nickels and dimes, and yeah, like on every side, like everything. And in the past, we've had stuff like, oh, this currency in Asia, like the RMB from China, or the Taiwan dollar is up, or the pound is weak, or the USD is weak, all these things. And or like this one material, like, oh, aluminum's expensive, or like for a while it was carbon fiber because Boeing is making a new Dreamliner and they're taking up 3/5 of the world's carbon supply or something. And it was always like one thing that was like, hey. Now it's every single freaking thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty mad. Like, the list just seems endless. So
it really is.
I'm definitely glad I don't have your job at this time, even though it is an exciting time in many ways. It sounds like an absolute headache, but I think I'll stick to riding.
Yeah. Though. Yeah. Again, I'm glad I'm not like at the portion of it that's really trying to put every little piece together to just bolt a bike together today. That is I definitely take a hat off to all those brave gals and gentlemen that are making that happen.
Yeah, one thing I was going to say is when you talk about like say sort of shipping prices and stuff going up, with regards the parts that you guys are trying to source to put in say your full builds, is that a case of just the lead times changing, or is there quite a lot of sort of opportune suppliers out there that are using it as an opportunity to just jack the prices up as a way to sort of equalize that supply and demand?
I was really surprised. I expected that there would be more kind of opportunism in the situation, that people would be like, oh, this is my time and I'm going to take advantage. But to be honest, like we're an American company, so the bikes that we're shipping into North America, the USD has been low compared to the Asian currencies. You guys are faring better. You don't have as much issue on that side, but so most of the changes that we've seen in pricing, they're really legitimate. Like they're not profiteering from anybody. Like I said, I was surprised. Like just in a kind of supply demand scenario, you would imagine that price changes have a lot to do with like demand's up. Going to crank up the cost and try to level these lines out. But not really, man. I mean, I would say that almost everything that I've seen that has to do with price changes has been really fair. And you can't expect any of these companies to be making less money with all of these costs increasing. Like legitimately, like aluminum is more expensive and stainless steel is more expensive, and labor over in a lot of parts of the world is more expensive than it has been. And market forces on currencies, all these different things, like legitimately, like a bike going up 10% in cost is, yeah, it's going to cost anybody who is making them at least that much more. And like, yeah, it's unfortunately part of it. And I think you're going to see that in a lot of different things that you're buying, unless it's really regional and localized. If you're buying things that come from other places, even not that far away, you're going to see that. You're going to see those increases.
Yeah, and we're already feeling the effects of not just the financial cost of Brexit, but the infuriating delays and stuff that things are coming in and getting held up at customs and stuff that we've had. We've definitely got used to stuff coming from Europe, at least, with not many restrictions. But unfortunately,
you got to have your
slightly,
fromage.
Yeah, exactly. But that's probably a whole other debate for a whole other day. So, but yeah, I think that's like we've nearly done it. Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, like, you guys have a whole other level of stuff. Seems like things might be leveling out in the USA a little bit. We'll see. We still got plenty of time to go until all this Corona stuff is well and gone. But yeah, you guys have a unique set of topics and things going on these days to complement the virus situation.
We'll catch up in person maybe, and we can do a Brexit podcast. Get some key players in, see how that's going to affect the bike industry, but which is going to be interesting for sure. But like I say, man, we've had you for almost an hour. I know it's getting later over there, so I don't want to hold you for too much longer. I really appreciate you coming on. It's really interesting to get a sort of in-depth sort of input from someone who's on the ground really and actually seeing it all happen firsthand. So
yeah. No worries, man. My pleasure. It's always a good time to talk to you.